Accutron Watches presents. From New York City, this is The Accutron Show, a time travel through American culture with your hosts, Bill McCuddy, Scott Alexander, and David Graver. Visit AccutronWatch.com and discover the brand that has made American history with an all-new proprietary next-generation electrostatic energy movement. Accutron. It's not a timepiece, it's a conversation piece.
But why weren't they spending money on watches? They weren't being marketed to. Men were being marketed to, largely. So suddenly now, women are being marketed to. And you are seeing a shift. You're absolutely seeing a shift.
The person you heard at the top of the show is today's guest. She's an editor, writer, and founder of the platform What's on Her Wrist. Barbara Palumbo is here to talk about women and watchmaking. But first up, I'm Bill McCuddy, along with Scott Alexander and editor David Graber, here for a brand new episode of The Accutron Show. It's right on time. Stay tuned.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our iconic Space View 2020 collection, recreating the stunning visual impact of the original open dial design combined with an all-new electrostatic energy movement. Time just changed again. The Accutron Space View 2020.
Who was the first influencer or blogger in the watch world?
David Graver.
David Graver was right. The Cool Hunting. How did I see Cool Hunting is 20 years old?
Yeah, we just turned 20. We turned
That's
20 on
crazy.
February 7th.
You look so happy about aging. Oh, congratulations. That's amazing.
We all just keep
20
getting
years
older.
Is an incredible amount of time for an industry that's changing so fast. It's like there's constantly stuff to come up with. And also, like, there's always new people nipping at your heels, and Cool Hunting has sort of stayed fresh this whole time. And
stay the course. Even
now
though everyone's getting younger.
20 years ago, you have women that write for Cool Hunting as well.
Yeah, of course.
But 20 years ago in the watch world, very unusual to have women reporting on and really running some of the watch companies and design, I guess we would call them design studios, or the sort of the in-house design end of. And I think that's why a lot of women wear men's watches, because there aren't a lot of watches for them.
Well, you had women. No, there were watches made for women, but they were like
tiny.
not so functional. Yeah, I remember like my grandfather always had these cool watches. They had like multiple, complications on them, and they could do little weird tricks. And I would be like, oh, that's so cool. And he'd like show me this whole thing, and he'd be like, oh, Grandma has a watch too. And I'd be like, where is it? Like literally these teeny tiny things where you're like, what? That's not useful to have.
It's more like costume jewelry. It wasn't really like a functional piece of time telling.
Yeah.
Barbara Palumbo sort of broke through the glass crystal, we'll call it, for this conversation. And she is going to tell us a little bit about, now you ran into her recently at the big watch guru
At
thing
Watches
that
and
happens.
Wonders in Geneva.
Yeah.
We take a lot of our appointments together. We run into each other quite often at watch fairs. That's actually, we met at a watch fair. We met at Basel World in 2016.
And these are conventions that all the watch manufacturers go to and show the new models and
to journalists and to buyers, and to retailers, so that they can see what's next. It's an entire year's worth of watches that you get to touch and feel and like play with.
And what else besides
It's Graverland.
It's Graverland. It's the most
like,
magical experience.
They
It's
all
context.
know him. It's so annoying. You can't go anywhere in the world. And what are some of the other big watch events over the years or over the course of a year that more is?
What's that calendar look
That's
like?
the granddaddy.
Dubai Watch Week. Watches and Wonders also has a Miami iteration. Dubai Watch Week also has a New York iteration. There's Worn and Wound. Then there's the Wind Up Watch Fair. There are a lot. It's not. Basel World, may it rest in peace, is no longer with us, but there are still so many fairs globally.
Some of them,
it's a circuit.
some of them concentrate on lower priced, sort of neat little niche-y brands, little collectible. There's a whole world out there of collectors who only spend up to $1,000 and try to find the next Ferland Mare, the thing that was.
Do they still tell time when they cost less than $1,000?
Yeah, they tell time for less than $1,000. A lot of people have watches that they've had forever. Some people they don't collect. They just go to the store when the old one dies and they buy a new one.
Or trade it in.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm really
trade it up.
I'm really curious to know about the next generation, whether women are always going to wear men's watches, and where you go to find out what's happening. And that's all going to happen when Barbara Palumbo is here. She's got a huge social following. What's on her wrist is kind of her podcast and
It's her platform.
And her platform. And so she's worn everything. And let's see if we can wear her down. Barbara Palumbo on the Accutron show right after this.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our Accutron DNA collection. Reimagined for a new generation, the Accutron DNA combines breakthrough technology, precise engineering, and modern aesthetics to achieve a new level of technical excellence. The Accutron DNA, the new face of time for those who blaze new trails.
Barbara Palumbo is part of What's on Her Wrist. She joins us now on the Accutron show. Barbara, what was the very first watch you ever wore?
Oh, ever wore? Oof, I don't know what I ever wore, but I know the first watch I ever owned. So can I tell you that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. My first ex-husband, and I have to differentiate now, as a wedding gift, gifted me in 1999 the Baume & Mercier Hampton. And it was my first Swiss-owned watch. And on the back of it, he engraved "For Time and All Eternity."
Yeah,
and I wore that watch. Yeah, sweet,
for
right?
a certain amount of time.
I know.
And a portion of eternity.
For a certain amount of time.
Apparently you two had a disagreement about the
for a certain amount of time
eternity.
and all eternity.
Right.
Right. Well, the funny thing is, we split, and it was after 9/11 when we split. And so when I started traveling again post 9/11, they were at the time, for a brief period of time, you don't have to do it anymore, but you used to have to take your watch off to go through go through security. And I took that watch off and I left it accidentally in the security bin and I lost it. But the crazy thing is, it was accidentally, because I loved that watch. I loved the Hampton so much, and it was a quartz, but I loved the design of that 90s Hampton, and it had only been out for a couple of years. I think maybe it came out in 97. I love that watch so much that I rebought it, the exact same watch, but now I had bought it with my own money and it wasn't engraved, and I still own it.
I was going to say, that's an opportunity. You can still get it engraved.
Yeah, on the back you could put "Rest in Peace" and the husband's name.
What made you fall in love with watches?
Oh gosh. So I'm a 27-year veteran of the jewelry industry, jewelry and watch, largely the jewelry and watch industries. And I actually started as a bench worker. I was a metalsmith's apprentice under 3 Armenian brothers on Philadelphia's Jewelers Row, which is Sansom Street. If you guys know anything about Philadelphia, it's the oldest jewelry district in the country. And throughout I think the first 20 years of my career, it was largely jewelry. You know, I was carving waxes before CAD existed, and I was operating casting ovens, and I really learned how to make jewelry from the inside out. And at the 20-year mark for me, which is, again, I'm about to turn 50, so this was most of my adulthood, I thought, okay, I've done everything in the jewelry world. I sat at the bench, I worked as a metalsmith, I worked in retail sales, I worked in wholesale sales, I worked for big name jewelry designers, I traveled the country, I traveled the world, but there were a lot of retailers I worked for, and I do trunk shows when I was out there as a brand rep, and I would pick the brains of the Rolex reps, and I would pick the brains of the Breitling reps, and I would pick the brains of the Longines reps and the Jaeger reps, and little by little I was like, God, I don't know crap about watches, but yet there's this whole sort of Venn diagram where it's weird because the jewelry industry likes to believe that watches are part of them, but the watch industry is like, no. Like, they don't want to be part of the jewelry industry. But there really is there is that Venn diagram. There is that layover, that gray area. There is crossover. And I think Watches and Wonders this year thoroughly proved that with the releases by Piaget and Van Cleef and Cartier and everything. They really are connected. And so I started getting my hands on every book I could possibly find. I read A Grand Complication. I got a subscription to Revolution magazine. I started reading anything written by, at the time, 7 years ago, by Jason Heaton and Jack Forster. And I was like, oh, wow, this is crazy. But I was also writing a jewelry blog at the time called Adore Mentality. And which I wrote with humor. It was a humorous jewelry blog, and nobody was really doing that on the watch side, men or women. And there were very few women writing about watches from the American side. I mean, the ones who existed were obviously, sort of like the old guard. They were here first, and they had been doing it for 15 years longer than I had. But there wasn't someone at my age 7 years ago that was really doing it, and there was nobody really doing it with like a cheekiness and a sense of humor. And so I think it was less about falling in love with watches than it was about falling in love with like the stories behind them and how to tell them in a more entertaining type way. So that was really, but in doing that made me fall in love with watches. So it was the concept that came along first. And it was the concept that led me to really loving what it was I was studying and having to talk about. But yeah, again, in sort of this like cheeky,
So you started out making fun of watches, then you fell in love.
Not even making fun of watches. Like I've done a couple of dictionary, like I've done like, dictionary definitions for the more of the idiot than the idiot savant. So, like how to explain analog. We don't even want to get into that because that definition was horrific. But like things like that, where it was like, yes, it was not necessarily making fun of watches, but it was more making fun of how seriously we take them.
Right.
Because you have your watch idiot savants, you have your Tim Massos, you have your Jack Forsters, you have these guys, who are just the rain men of this industry. But you want a greater appeal. You want to be able to turn on, a middle-aged woman like me, or a 30-year-old woman, or again, like a 25-year-old gay man, or somebody, more people of color. You've got to be able to expand yourself. And so I thought humor is. It expands it's
right.
a wide, there's a wide
poking
variety
at the sort of
people.
stodginess of the attitudes or things like this. Because you're right, like there could be so much of a wider sort of reach for this industry.
And there is now, and I'm very happy to see it. I'm very happy to see that, gatherings that are put forth by Complecto, where they're really accepting of more women and people of color. I love seeing that. I think that I don't want to say proud, because I don't want to feel like I was at the beginning of it. But then there's also a part of me that does feel like, what, I definitely, somebody said to me in Geneva that I was the OG of the NG. And I said, what does that mean? They said, you're the old guard of the new guard. So like, but they were like, you're kind of like, you're OG, but you really did kind of have this idea in mind that like, we really need to make this a lot more fun than we're making it, and have it stop being about, like just again, like hairsprings and it, like just and there is a market for that. There is a readership completely for the guys that follow those folks that I mentioned earlier.
You've seen so much growth, but what more can be done? What do you hope to see?
I do hope. So my fear is, with more and more brands themselves pulling away from mom and pop retailers and the people who made them largely who they are. And I'm just talking US at this point. Okay. So I'm not talking necessarily, and I know Watches of Switzerland is part of, obviously they've come into the US and everything, and they own Mayors. And so they're largely here now. And Bucher took over Tourneau. So like Bucher has such a presence here now. But I'm talking about the companies like the London Jewelers, the Lee Michaels, the Providence in South Florida, the guys who really helped to put a lot of these brands on the map. I'm sad to see some of these brands pull out of and open their own boutiques and sort of forget that these guys were, that. So I think we're on the right path for women. I think we're on the right path for inclusion generally across the board. I think finally we're on the right path. I do think that there is, and I don't know if I get to say this now because I am older, but there is an ageist issue that nobody tends to talk about, because now suddenly it's like young people, young women, people of color, blah. But then you got the people like me over here going, hi, I still exist. Like we can't forget that there are people who are middle-aged or older who are still, buying watches. We want to just kind of like look at everybody generally. But I think what I would like to see is more brands stop. Like, I get it. You're opening brand boutiques and that's great for your brand. But a lot of these mom and pop retailers, man, these brick and mortar retailers, they were a large part of the reason some of these brands became what they were. And so I do, I want to see them still continue to thrive. I know a lot of them personally, having come from being a road rep and now full in, I'm 27 years. I mean, literally the entirety of my adult life for the most part. And I know these people and they're good people. And I hate to see them be left behind just because, the brands are like, oh, well, we're really successful now. So we're going to open our own boutiques and we're going to stop opening doors for mom and pop retail. I would like to see that continue.
There's the piece you talked about it in
guys,
can I take
a drink of my wine? It is
please, by all means.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Here's to you.
Just to make this more interesting.
You mentioned the inclusion factor being a big thing, which obviously, you can't until you're letting the barriers down to let, more diverse people in, you're not going to get that. But is there, from the other side, it feels like there's got to be also be the interest factor for women, for people of color, for younger people, for all these things. Where does that come from? How can the industry sort of foment that interest in those markets?
Well, I think there are a lot of younger folks right now who are helping with that. Now, being I'm a Gen Xer, and I think probably at least 2 of the 3 of you on this panel are also Gen X. Am I correct? or just one? Just one.
Bill aspires to be.
Are you, Scott? You're a millennial. You're a millennial.
No, I'm Gen X.
Yeah, you're Gen X. Okay. Oh, Bill's not Gen X? Buddy, you look great.
Thanks, baby.
You look great, honey. I'm telling you. All right, I'm going to tell you were Gen X. All right.
He's got his flannel.
He's like 3.5 years old. Look at him. He's the cutest thing ever on the planet. No, so I think, yes, of course, we have this next generation of young people and people of color and young women who are coming in and they're going, we're trying to make this fun. I think what we're seeing a lot on that side is celebrity, where they're pulling in the celebrity aspect, right? And that potentially is making people, it's like, okay, what's on Rihanna's wrist and what's Queen Latifah wearing, which Queen Latifah is a huge watch collector. And, so that's cool. And if that's something that gets more women interested in watches or more people of color interested in watches, who am I to say that that's right or wrong? That's great. If it gets somebody interested in watches, that's perfect. In the same way that I wouldn't diss an Apple Watch, because I do feel that the Apple Watch was a good segue into getting people used to wearing something on their wrist. So I could never really knock the Apple Watch.
I'll do it for you.
Okay, no, go ahead, dude. Knock it all you want. It's fine. Look, I have a lot of friends who look at Adam Craniotes, the head of Red Bar, the founder of Red Bar.
Indeed.
This guy wears an Apple Watch on one wrist and a mechanical watch on another.
I know a lot of people
There
that
are
do
plenty
that.
of people out there who
well, that gets to this point
do it.
where you're comparing it with jewelry, and these days, I mean, a watch, none of us we all have ways to know the time instantly. Right. Whether it's an Apple Watch or whatever it is, they're not for that anymore, really.
Yeah, this is kind of an ongoing conversation we have here. We're talking about young people. We're talking about Apple Watches and stuff, and we sort of on an ongoing basis talk about this. It's a decision to wear a watch.
Sure. But it's a decision to wear a pair of Louboutin shoes. It's a decision to buy an Hermes bag. Right. So the key, and for me, and this is why I went it from the humor route. And believe me, I have a lot. Again, I have a lot of connections through the jewelry world, and I cannot tell you how many messages over the years I got from jewelers, women jewelers, who said, "For years I've owned the store, or I've worked in the store, I was a salesperson at the store, and I never, ever, ever once thought about putting a watch on my wrist. I only was focused on what earrings, or what necklace, or what rings, or what bracelets I was wearing. But you made me interested because you approached this in a way that was funny and interesting, and you told stories, and you went back through history, and suddenly, like, for the last couple of years, I've been wearing a watch. I live for that. I live to hear those stories. I think it's brilliant. Yes, it's a matter of turning the mindset and making women, because women will and I'm gonna generalize here terribly, but I will. Generally, women might buy, and let's put it this way: my generation of women would spend money on a bag. They would spend money on a pair of shoes. They would spend money on clothing. I know I did. Not bags, but shoes and clothing for me, huge. Completely spend money on that. But why weren't they spending money on watches? They weren't being marketed to. Men were being marketed to largely. So suddenly now women are being marketed to, and you are seeing a shift. You're absolutely seeing a shift, and it's also men who are interested in buying, where a man might buy somebody a pair of diamond earrings for an anniversary or a birthday. Men who actually are interested in watches might go, well, hell, I want to buy, hoot, I want to buy, my wife. The matching Rolex to my Rolex. I want to buy her, a presidential. I want to buy her a Datejust, or you'll be on the waiting list probably for a little while. But so, yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a shift in the way that we're just seeing a shift in gender roles, period. I mean, men they're comfortable wearing gem set timepieces now. They're comfortable wearing, how many men I saw wearing pearls at Watches and Wonders that made me so proud having a jewelry background.
Wow.
It was like, yeah, so we're seeing, with gender roles becoming a bit more fluid, I think we're definitely seeing a change there. With the Gen Z and millennials coming in and going, I mean, they literally are our future. I mean, they're just,
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to democratize watches, we should be democratizing
better.
pearls at the same time, right? I'm serious.
Agree.
We should
Pearls are very big for men right
democratizing.
now, and it's
Yeah.
it's
Dude,
it's
Is that
Right?
absolutely
true?
beautiful.
I don't get out
David?
enough.
Yeah.
Don't you feel
I
like
remember getting on the bus heading to the Palexpo with an English journalist, Shane. I don't know if you know him, David.
Yeah.
But he had a beautiful pearl, like a pearl necklace on. And I was like, dude, I just,
Harry Styles?
it's
Harry
now
Styles
gone from
opened the
just
store for so
Pharrell
many
Williams
people.
wearing them to Harry Styles, to just Pharrell and Harry Styles wearing them. So there's your celebrity aspect, to now like the everyday person, or like the watch journalist was wearing it. And I was like, yeah, man, rock on. Like I love it. I loved
Don't
it.
you
Really
feel like the watch industry has finally caught up? For the longest time, a woman's watch was a smaller version of a man's watch with gems.
Yeah.
And now there are actual interesting options for women.
Yeah. The shrink and pink aspect,
The
right?
shrink and pink.
I mean, that's the shrink and pink, right? So throw mother of pearl dial on the same men's watch, and it's always men who are designing it. And so everybody just like hailed them like, oh, hail Caesar, hail Caesar. It was very, very Mel Brooks. Yeah. So, but it was BS. And look, I do come from the generation where I do prefer a smaller watch. And even though I'm tall, I'm 5'10", I'm a big woman, not big, but I'm a tall woman. So I could easily wear a 42 millimeter, but I'm honestly most comfortable in a 36. I have like a Bremont Solo 32, which I really love. I have 34 millimeter watches. I have the Breitling Navitimer 35. I love that watch. I wear it to death. I also have a Navitimer 38. I'm comfortable in that mid 30-ish range up to the 40 millimeter range. That's what I really like. But I like the fact that my Breitlings there's no gemstone, which is funny because I'm an April baby and diamonds are that's my birthstone. And I have plenty of watches that have diamonds. But one of the first watches I bought for myself was an Hermes L'Heure H, and it's got diamond markers, and I love it. So and it's quartz. So I have my quartz diamond pieces, but then I have my mechanical pieces, then I have my microbrand pieces, and then I have my Reverso. And it's like, that's the difference, is that the watch world, and I think largely the men coming from the watch world who were like the heads and the CEOs or the head designers or whatever, were thinking of it like women like this. No. Women like everything. Like in the same way, if you looked at every one of my boyfriends or lovers or husbands across the entity of my life, they all look different. You know what I mean? It's literally like different walks of life. I've had Frenchies, I've had Italians, I've had Turks, I've had tall, I've had short, I've had heavier, I've had skinny. It's just like my watch collection completely reflects my lovers.
Right.
I have a question. We spend so much time at watch fairs, at watch events, talking about watches. Do you ever get tired of having a geeky watch conversation?
No, because I feel like, gosh, honestly, David, think about it. Like, how many of those fairs do we attend over the course of the year? Now that Basel World's gone, right? It's like, okay, Watches and Wonders is the amalgam of, it's the conglomerate. It's Basel World meets SIHH meets, but minus Swatch Group, right? So like, it is, okay, fine. So you're there. But for me, the reality is I also go to Dubai Watch Week, either in Dubai every other year or when they have horology forum. I've been blessed enough and lucky enough to have been asked to speak 5 times. I was a moderator 5 times with them, which has been great. And it's coming up again in Dubai. So I have my fingers crossed that I get there again. But the reality is, I don't get to see. So the Americans, David, you and I might be on the same press trip, right? We might be on the same press trip with Adam or Justin or our North American colleagues. But I don't get to see my international colleagues a lot. And it is those places where you get to geek out with someone. Again, I think I talked about this in the Scottish Watches podcast that I just did, which came out recently, where I was in the Cartier meet and greet, and it's like 80 plus novelties. You have 45 minutes to see everything. But I'm in there with like Nicholas, my friend, buddy Nicholas from Lebanon, and Karishma from India, and Joshua from Quill and Pad, and somebody else who's from Geneva. And it's like, I get to pick their brains, which is so interesting to me because what's selling in India is different from what's selling in Lebanon, and what brands are hot in Turkey, what brands are hot, elsewhere. So I actually don't tire of it from the fair aspect because it allows me to open my mind to not just being so US, not being so, New York, Atlanta, Georgia, LA, Miami, like in this tiny little, like my blinders are on, I'm a horse in the race, and that's it. I get to actually go, well, tell me, Karisha, in Mumbai, like, what's a hot brand right now? Like, what's a hot brand for the guys in the collector groups out there? And she'll tell me, or she'll say the retailers are doing really well with this brand or whatever. So I don't tire of it because I just feel like there's so few of these fairs that happen where I get to be in a more international community. And I don't know if you agree or disagree with me about that.
I 100% agree. I definitely agree.
Barbara, we are excited that you never get tired talking about it and like to geek out on it. And we have lots more questions. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, there is more with the woman who has something on her wrist and a few things on her mind. Barbara Palumbo joins us back here at the Accutron Show in just a moment. Don't go away.
This podcast is presented by Accutron Watches. Visit our website, accutronwatch.com, and discover our legacy collection, reviving some of the most memorable Accutron watches from the 60s and 70s. The Legacy Collection combines timeless design with the technical excellence of Swiss watchmaking, each limited to 600 individually numbered pieces. The Accutron Legacy Collection, inspired by the past, built for the future.
Barbara Palumbo, welcome back to the Accutron Show. Thanks for staying with us. And I guess we want to get a little more into the history of how women are getting involved in this industry, because you were, as you said earlier, kind of the lone star for a little while. Are there more and more women as part of watchmaking and reporting?
Yeah, I mean, without dropping names, obviously there were a handful of women who like to pride themselves on being, the first women in the industry, and there were, and again, there were definitely a handful on the U.S. side. There are absolutely women who are reporting on watches in Europe and in Asia, and again, credit where credit is due. A lot of those women. Actually, I think like Tracy Elwin from the UK, she's tremendous, and she's like EIC, I think, of the Telegraph, and talking about watches. I mean, a lot of these people were heroines of mine, and people that I really looked up to. But for me, I think one of the draws, because again, I could be cheeky and I could be funny, but one of the things that I'd like to do for the month of March, or during at least part of the month of March. Unfortunately, March is Watches and Wonders, and sometimes I have to pick and choose because I am a one-woman show. I'm freelance. I write. I have my own gig, and I don't have a team. I don't travel with a team. I am my own team. So when people say there is no I in team, no. But there isn't, as to quote Kobe Bryant, there is an ME in that mother effer. So yes, I have to think about me when I think about my own team, because that is me. And so it's like, okay, it's Women's History Month, and that's March. And I'd like to always start on March 1st of Women's History Month with highlighting a woman in the watch community that over history was important. And so every year for the last several years on March 1st, I always highlight Corrie ten Boom. And Corrie ten Boom was there's been a book written about her. I think there was a movie made. She was the first women watchmaker in the Netherlands, and she and her father were watchmakers, and they hid Jews under their watchmaking bench during the Holocaust. So her story is incredible, and I always like to tell her story on the first day of Women's History Month. And then I try every day, and I definitely fail because, again, between being a single mother of two children, two teenagers at this point, and travel and Watches and Wonders and everything else that life throws at you, it's tough to keep up every day. But I do try to focus on the history of women in the watchmaking world. There was a woman in Peoria, Illinois, who she had nothing to do with watches. She was a philanthropist, but she lost like all 6 of her children to illnesses and her husband to like a tragic accident. And she took the money and she started a school for watchmaking in Peoria, Illinois. So I like to talk about her, and I like to talk about the woman who ran Blanc Pond for years. And then, Elsa Peretti, who clearly was, she was designing watches when she was with Tiffany. So I try to sort of give Eddie, because I have just shy of 10,000 followers on my watch Instagram, and I have roughly 15,000 on my jewelry Instagram page. So the people who are out there who are paying attention, and that's not just women, that's men and women, don't know a lot of these stories. And so, I did a deep dive some years back, and I will repeat the stories every March if I'm able to, from a timing standpoint, about a lot of these women. I mean, there was like the first Swedish watchmaker who never got married, and her mother had to like sign off on her space to become a watchmaker because her mother was married, but she wasn't married. And so you weren't allowed to have own property at the time in Sweden without having a husband. And so like her mother and father had to like sign off on her property for her to become a watchmaker, but she had never gotten married. It was just like, she just wanted to be a watchmaker. And then one of the other women that I talk about, and you'll have to forgive me because off the top of my head, I'd have to go back in and actually look at their name. Out of New York, out of the States, Wittnauer watches. You guys know that. I'm sure fairly well. The brothers were running the company, and I believe had all passed away. And so the only member of the family that was left to run the company was a woman, was the sister. And so she ran, she ran the company for a handful of years until it was bought out. You have the Greenwich, again, GMT, Greenwich Mean Time, that there was a woman in England who sold time. She literally had like the most perfectly timed watch according to the conservatory in England. And so she would go to places and sell them time. She sold time. She would say, there is no watch that's more accurate than this. I can tell you what time it is. You pay me X amount per month. So yeah, all of these women like I've written about, and again, their names and their histories and the years and everything are mentioned just after doing some deep dive research. To me, that's also interesting. Like, I love to be humorous. I love to be cheeky. I like to get fun with talking about watches, but there is also this appeal to me, because I am a fan of history, to know like who doesn't get enough credit, which women in this industry do not get the highlights that they deserved. Long gone, long past the majority of them, but there are also ones that still exist today. I mean, there remains a fact that JLC has a woman CEO, and that's a huge thing for a Richemont brand. And the Piaget did. I know that they no longer do, but Piaget did. That was also like, Shari, like when she came on board, we were like, yes, thank goodness. Like, we want to see, obviously, citizen group. Look at Susan. Like, I live for that. I love to see women at the helm of a brand, because I know how hard women work, and I know, and again, especially being a mother, it's and a single mother now, it's not an easy task. So I try to give credit where credit's due. It's at least like all these women for part of Women's History Month.
All these women who've worked in the industry, it's remarkable that they don't get as much credit as they should, or as recognized as they should. But do you think that has anything to do with this watches being this one kind of jewelry that men felt okay wearing? And they're like, yeah, I feel okay wearing it as long as a lady's not me.
Right. So as long as we own it.
Is there something about like masculinity in that? Is it, or is it just straight up old school, misogyny?
I will tell you, Scott, I don't think I've ever come across a man in my 27 years in either jewelry or watches that said, I won't wear I only wear watches because the lady isn't making it. That's I don't think it's neither one here nor there. I think that's like that's just like silly. What I think is just watches represent it's oftentimes with men, their father wore watches or their grandfather wore watches, and it's just something that look, a lot of these folks, and myself included, I come from a military family. My grandfather served in both World War I and World War II. My mother's father, this was a guy who, well, he wore a cheap watch, and I didn't know him. He was passed long before I was born. But this was a guy I knew, like, you wore a military type watch. So your fathers, your grandfathers likely were in some form of the service in some way, shape, or form. And so they wore military watches or pilot watches, so we were used to kind of seeing that. And then it became, the Seikos and the Casios and the digital watches. And I mean, my father wore, I would always call them drugstore watches, like CVS watches, before CVS was even in a thing, where you could go in and literally like take them off the, like you could take them off the little rack, and that's what he wore. And he didn't care. It was like he wore it until the battery died and he threw it away and he went and he bought another one.
Do you encourage your children to wear watches?
Do I encourage them? Oh my God, my son. So my daughter, I do encourage. My son, I never had to. I gifted my son. I remember reaching out to Craniotes and saying, because I knew he was a big G-Shock guy. And I think it was my son's 11th birthday. And I said, so my son will be 17 next month. And I said, I want to get him his first G-Shock. What do you recommend? Something around like the $100 range, whatever. So Craniote sent me a link and he said, this is a good one. This is what I got. His son and my son are about the same age and our daughters are close in age. He's like, this is the one I got, Paul. But so I went online, I ordered it. I gave it to my son. That was his first G-Shock. At this point in time, he owns 5 G-Shocks, 2 which are limited editions that I got from London. So he owns
like the gold one,
the Rubik's Cube no, not the Rubik's Cube. It was the collaboration they did with Rubik's, because my son's a big Rubik's Cube fan too, that you could only buy at the London G-Shock boutique. So I had a buddy in London get it for me. And when I was in London, like he brought it to me when I was there, which was great. And then
Has
I
he
was
solved
in the
it
London
yet?
boutique.
Yeah.
Oh, he could do it in seconds. He learned the algorithms. My son can, he's one of those kids that solves Rubik's Cubes in like a crazy sick amount of time. It's like crazy. We got an A6 one, which was also limited edition just from the London boutique, which I had signed by eBay himself. He was there. The guy who started G-Shock, he was there. So my son's watch was signed. Then I got him a couple others. Then we went to a Sinatra. We went to the Bull of a Sinatra was his next one. That was his first.
Oh, no kidding. We didn't know that.
Well, because it was mine and he was so obsessed with it that I said, you know what? He didn't have a mechanical timepiece. So I gifted it to him. So he wears it regularly. He loves it. Wow. Then Eric wins the Seiko 5 by Rowing Blazers. All 3 of my children have. I have all 3 of my children. I clearly just created another child in my mind. No, all 3 of us. Although I do have a dog, so I guess that's 3, but he doesn't have a watch yet. Yeah. All 3 of us have the Seiko 5s. My daughter has one, my son has one, and I have one.
I have one
so he
too.
wears that. And I know they're amazing.
They're amazing. Yeah,
my son has the orange, my daughter has the green, and I have the black with the colorful flags.
I have
Which
the
one do you
light
have?
blue.
Oh my God, you have the 4th one. That's it. They only did the 4th. Love that. And so I was just in Geneva and I picked them up each, my son and my daughter, and gave for Easter, I gave them each a moon swatch. So my daughter has the sun and my son got the Jupiter, which they had restocked the Geneva stores, the swatch stores, with the moon swatches. So I gave them each and he wore it today and he posted it on Instagram today and said, thanks, what's on her wrist? Like, not thanks, Mom. He was like, thanks, what's on her wrist?
No, he's working for the brand. He's working for the brand.
When we think about the history of watches and, where they came from, you have diving watches, you have aviator watches, you have all these different things and the things that watch consumers wanted out of things, multiple time zones, or these sort of functional pieces. When you see this new generation coming in and getting into watches for the first time, what are the things they're looking for? Are there unique aspects that they're looking for in watches that we should be looking for in the next 10, 20 years?
Okay. So I think, again, if we compartmentalize the new generation, if we generalize who they are, then I don't want to do that. Because like me, and using the analogy of my lovers over my lifetime, the new generation, everybody wants something different, because the new generation is again, I mean, they're short hair and long hair, and men are wearing pearls and men are not wearing pearls, and they're right and they're left, and they're their own people. And I think anymore it's tough to just write an article, and David can probably agree with me here, that says like what Gen Z is interested in. You really kind of can't, because the whole thing about Gen Z is that they don't want to be compartmentalized, and they don't want to just go, okay, we're into poodle skirt. We're the 1950s and we wear poodle skirts. Right. They're like, no, we're like, we're just like, we're fluid on everything. So that's what I think generally, if I had to generalize, I would say you have some of the younger folks who are interested in what celebrities are wearing, but then you also have a lot of the younger folks who are into micro brands, who are like, I want something that's so unique, that's so not what anybody else is wearing, that has a story, that's been started by a person my age who looks like me. That's what I like. This is why the Wind Up Watch Fair is doing so well in New York. And I'm actually going to go visit the San Francisco one for the first time, because I'm enthralled. I mean, I own a Haim. I have the Formex. I want to get a Studio Underdog. I'm 50 and I'm obsessed with micro brands right now. And I go there and it's like, there were thousands of people at the Wind Up Watch Fair in October in 2022. And these were young people. These were young people who were listening to people their age who had started. Furlan Mari, oh my God, this he's like in his 20s. This guy's young and he's won the GP. He's won a GPHG. Like these are.
I thought he was the intern when I walked up to that booth. I honest to God introduced myself and said I'd like to meet the head of the company. We're talking about Furlan Mari. And I guess we should also tell people listening that what the Wind Up Watch Fair is, if you don't know what that is a gathering of companies, and it's at $1,000 and under. Is that basically the rule, or is there no rule?
Because Oris is there. So Oris goes there, and there are some slightly, I'll say mid-level brands. Let's say mid-level brands, right? Oris is there. Maurice Lacroix is there. So there are brands absolutely that are selling watches that are over $1,000, but they're largely independent brands. So that's the thing. It's like independent brands. They're not part of a big conglomerate, and it's reasonably priced. But then a lot of the brands are selling. I mean, this Formex is $1,700. So this one, they only make 100 of the malachite dial per year. So it's roughly 1,700 plus on Formex's website. So it's not 1,000 or under, but it is still, I think, what we as watch people potentially would consider today to be like really reasonably priced,
value price,
accessible to the layperson, to even the Gen Zer who's up and coming. It's like, you know what? If it's going to be the watch I wear for a long time, like for the next 5 years until I graduate to an Oris, or graduate from an Oris to a Breitling, or graduate from a Breitling to, or whatever, it's a brand that I think is reasonably priced for them. The $1,400-$1,500 range, or like you said, like again, Citizen and Boulevard, those are all great watches to be starter. I like to refer to them as starter watches. A Seiko 5, a great starter watch for $500. I always recommend those to people who are like, I want to get into watches, but I can't fathom sinking $5,000-$10,000 into a watch. I'm like, start here. And then you graduate. It's like with anything else, your cars were always like a Pinto, like for me. And then eventually you get up to, well, I only have a Mazda at this point, but I'm hoping to graduate someday to a Jaguar. So, I still have time and more ex-husbands to have. So I'm hoping to get to that, the Jaguar.
Timeline.
Yes, exactly.
Barbara Palumbo has her finger on the pulse of what's happening in watches, because that's where her wrist is. What's on her wrist? Follow her in social. And thank you so much for joining us today on the Accutron
thanks,
show.
Guys. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I love the show. I love the guests that you've had on. I know this is a show you like to talk about lifestyle and other things. And there's not a whole, even though it's the Accutron show, you don't talk about watches a ton. So thanks for allowing me to kind of wax poetic. I think,
it was our pleasure. And thank you for the history.
About watches and lovers. So yeah, thanks. That's going to be my next podcast, Watches and Lovers.
Watches and Lovers. All right.
To give Accutron a run for their money. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you for listening to The Accutron Show. To listen to all of our shows, visit AccutronWatch.com. To learn more about the world of Accutron, follow us on Instagram at Accutron Watch and subscribe to our podcast. From New York City, until next time, Accutron time.